Good morrow to you all. You have fallen on barred times.
Brought to you by RHUL Shakespeare Society.
You've joined me, Cassie Dixon.
And me, Jack Hardman, as we bear some bardy truths. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Barred Times. I'm here this week with Eleanor Rutter, one of the directors of In Your Dreams.
Hello.
And, how are you doing, Eleanor?
I'm good. I'm alright. Yeah, how are you?
Good. I'm wonderful, thank you. Busy as ever, but, So, yeah. Obviously, as one of the directors of In Your Dreams, that is a project that's coming up soon, I believe in January?
I think we're looking more at end of December is the hope. The aim is before Christmas, but we're still working that out. But soon, very, very soon.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. That is obviously the show with Musical Theatre Society this term. Would you like to give a quick kind of summary of it?
Yeah. So it's a collection of songs from shows that we'd love to be able to do, but for some reason that we can't. So maybe the rights aren't available, or the cast size is too big, or anything like that. So we've just chosen some of our favourites that we would do from musicals if we could, and we've put them on. So, yeah.
Hence the name In Your Dreams, then, I suppose.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So obviously, as per usual, full disclosure, I'm in this show, and Eleanor is directing me in one of these numbers, which I'm very lucky for. So I was wondering, how are you finding it? How are you finding the whole process?
It was a struggle at first, because I've been directing for maybe 3-4 years, and I have I've developed like a way of doing it that works for me really well. But a lot of that required being in the room with the actors. So then having to move to Zoom rehearsals, I did struggle at the beginning, because I was like, I have this routine that now doesn't work. And there was quite a bit of adjusting and kind of trial and error and learning. But then I remember I had this one rehearsal with the other number that I'm directing, and it just went so well. And I was like, I've cracked it. I've cracked Zoom directing. I've got it now. So it was tricky at first, but now I think I figured it out for me anyway, like how I translate my own process into Zoom.
Fair. Yeah, so, I mean, if you think you've kind of got Zoom directing down, would you like to share with us some of your, like, magic theorem?
I don't know. I think a lot of it was, for me, kind of asking the actors. So there's this one thing that I quite like to do that my friend actually brought to me when we were doing Antigone a couple of years ago. And we were trying to get the weariness of the soldiers, because it's set just after a war and kind of everyone's absolutely exhausted. And so to kind of get that physically, he filled this backpack with like books and really heavy things and put it on each of the actors and got them to kind of walk around with it and do certain tasks, like pack and unpack this box that he brought in with the backpack on, to get them to really feel it and embody it. So when I was doing one of the other songs, I said to Tom, I was like, your character is exhausted. Do you have like a backpack near you that you can just fill with books and put that on and just kind of feel how physically different that is? And he found that really helpful, which is great. So it's kind of collaborating much more with the actors, and because obviously I can't physically bring things in, so it's asking the actors, do you mind doing this? Can you try? Do you have this to hand? Like, don't worry if you don't. But yeah, so that's how I kind of worked around it.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, this sounds like a very physical, like a physical type of directing. Would you describe yourself as a physical director? I
think yes and no. I'm not kind of movement. I do tend to kind of ask other people for, but I do like kind of physical exercises, and very much kind of Jerzy Kotowski is one of my favorite practitioners, and kind of the idea of body isolation and how you move as a character and how what you're feeling on the inside is expressed on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think that most directors that you talk to will realise that there isn't really... I mean, there is obviously a separation between, like, the mental side and the kind of almost psychological aspect of trying to get to the root of a character. But if you completely separate that from body, then it's just disingenuous, I think, in most cases. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard of the person you were talking about just then. Would you give us a summary for those at home who aren't drama students?
So Jerzy Kotowski was a Polish director in the kind of mid to late 20th century. He actually died the year I was born, which is really sad, because I really like him. And he did a lot... I don't know if he invented the idea of pour theatre, but he worked a lot with pour theatre, which is kind of very blank blank stage, minimal prop set, costume, and just kind of very much focused on the body of the actor, which as a drama student I loved. I was like, this is so fascinating. So when I did Antigone, it was very kind of minimal, and you just had kind of like the odd signifier for costume or prop, but other than that it was very much kind of about the body and the space and the emotion and the proxemics and the tension between the characters that you kind of can really focus in on when the stage is completely blank.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, I think I might be misrepresenting here, because again, not a drama student, but it's quite like a almost Grotowski-esque form of theatre, where it is like the whole focus is just on the actors, rather than on like a flashy bit of staging or something like that. Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, I love theatre like that. As some of you who are listening may know, one of my favourite plays that I've ever seen is A Woman in Black, which is an excellent example of poor theatre. I think in the entire thing, they stay on like one set. They use a bunch of like hay bales, the majority of the kind of props and things. Yeah, so basically, I love it. I see what you're doing. It's great. Yeah, so obviously you have directed a musical show before on campus with Edges, but what exactly, to be fair, if you want, what drew you to each of the shows that you've directed on campus?
Yeah, so for In Your Dreams, it was a very specific... I've been doing theatre since I was 4 years old, and since then there has never ever been a time in my life where I haven't been working on some kind of show, usually more than one at once. There have been times when I've been doing like 3 performances at the same time. And so I finished my undergraduate degree, which was drama and English, and I was suddenly like, what am I going to do for theatre? Because it's always been like extracurricular stuff. And obviously with COVID, everything shut down. I was like, I need some kind of theatre in my life. And then I was coming back from masters and saw In Your Dreams advertising for crew positions, and I was like, that will kind of satiate the need for theatre.
That will fill that hole.
Yeah. Fill the gap for me. And also just the idea of it, the kind of any song that you want to do but for some reason you can't do, have at it, really, really appealed to me. And then also for Edges, I just love Pasek and Paul. So it was something they did when they were at the University of, I want to say Michigan, but that might not be right. But back in like 2005, so before La La Land, before The Greatest Showman, before Dear Evan Hansen, Dogfight.
I was going to say,
like
for people that aren't like musical theatre buffs, those are the people that did Greatest Showman and La La Land and things like that.
Yeah. So I just really love them, and kind of the key thing about Edges is it's about being at this moment in your life where you're at the edge, hence the name, and it's kind of very much about growing up and growing into different parts of your life and big changes. And as a third year facing employment with a English drama degree, I was like, this feels very, very apt.
Fair. That makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, I was wondering how. So obviously you have directed a previous play that is not musical theatre. And you have directed musical theatre, and I would like to ask you, what do you think is the big difference between the two? Like, is there anything that is massively important in one and less so in the other?
One of the key differences is when you do a musical, you have to kind of make time for the actual songs and the dance numbers, so you have a lot less time to kind of work on characterization. It's not that you can't do it at all, you absolutely can, but kind of when I do a straight play, I tend to do a whole week of character workshops that you just don't really have time to do when you're doing a musical, because you have to fit in all these other factors that don't come into just a straight play. And kind of, for the most part, the songs and the dances take longer to learn than the blocking. So a lot of the time rehearsal is prioritised for singing and dancing as opposed to the actual acting side of it.
Yeah, that makes sense, to be honest. That I was wondering, because you mentioned blocking. How important is blocking to you in directing in general?
Yeah, for me it's quite important, because when I read a play, I see it really clearly in my head, so I know exactly kind of where I want people to stand and when I want them to move. And I'm very interested in like proxemics, So where characters stand in relation to each other and kind of the body language between them really interests me. So in my head, I'm very much kind of like, I want you here and I want you to move at this point. So for me, blocking is quite important, but I understand that for others, it's not so important. But for me, it's very much kind of, I have an idea in my head and I want to put it on the stage. But I do work with the actors. Like if an actor does say, oh, I don't feel like, for me this doesn't feel natural, like can I move here instead, I'm like, yeah, go for it, like see how it works. It's very much a process. So I don't come in like, you're going to move here and here. It's very much like, I want you to move here, we'll see how it feels. If you don't like it, we'll try something else.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've worked together in the opposite roles, and I think one of the big things you said to me during Love Labour's Lost, which was the play I directed last year, was why on earth where is the blocking? Because for me, I like to, I think in general, blocking kind of restricts the actor and it takes them out of the space, but I do get the idea that like once you've rehearsed it a few times and once the actor's used to a certain pattern, you lock that in so that you can kind of keep the whole scene, like keep order. Essentially, it's a very ordered way of doing a show. I completely understand it. I'm just more chaotic. But as a man, I'm also more chaotic, so that makes sense. So obviously, as hinted at there, you have done lots of roles on campus. You've acted, you've directed, you produced The Addams Family a few years ago.
I DSM'd The Addams Family. I produced
DSM The Addams Family.
King Lear and Love Labour's Lost. Not Love Labour's Lost. Sorry, The Taming of the Shrew.
Good. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to miss thingy there. Misrepresent you. But yeah, so obviously you've done a bunch of roles on campus. If there was one in particular that you'd say kind of you associate with the most, what would that be?
Probably is directing.
Right.
Just because, and I kind of fell into it because I always saw myself as more of an actor. And then when I got to uni, I was like, you know what, I'll try some backstage roles and just kind of, because I thought knowing how the backstage work will help me as an actor kind of understand the process of a show in general.
Yeah.
And then I found directing. I was like, oh, I like this. So I'm gonna run with this. But it is something I kind of very much fell into, but felt much more natural for me because when I'm acting, in my head I'm always kind of like, this could go wrong, that could go wrong, I could forget my line, the prop could not be on the table, someone could come in late, the lights, like there's so much going on in my head that as a director backstage I'm like, my job's done now on show day. Like if they mess up, it's not on me. Like I can just watch and enjoy kind of thing.
Fair.
But yeah, I just love the whole directing process as well, kind of the exploration at the beginning through to the final project. I just love the whole thing from a crew perspective.
I think there's a very special relationship that you have as a director to the actors. That is different. It's different than any other role. I mean, obviously, it's going to be different than any other role. Otherwise, those roles would be director. But it's a special kind of almost intimacy between an actor and a director. An understanding, I'd say, maybe less than intimacy. Yeah, so obviously you have mentioned that you've been in plays for your entire life since you were 4. So is there a favourite play that you have done either on campus or off campus?
Yeah, so when I was about 14, I was Alice in a version of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, very nice.
That we did at a theatre like one town over from me, that I just loved. I absolutely loved it. And it was almost a retelling. So it was about the real world was the modern world. And it was set, Alice had an older brother that had died, and the way she kind of dealt with it and escaped was by going to Wonderland. And so all the people at the funeral became characters in Wonderland. So like the Cheshire Cat was this uncle that just kept trying to make her smile. And Tweedledum and Tweedledee were these 2 cousins that she had that just kept running around kind of thing. And it was so much fun, but it was so exhausting because I was in every single scene.
Right.
And
which
so
as a 14-year-old
was very tiring.
Yeah.
And so the only kind of break I got was the 15-minute interval for the whole show. And I just remember there was this one other actor that was like, oh, I'm so tired. And I was like, you've been in 2 dances. I have not left the stage. Like, shut up. But that was so much fun. And I did also kind of, they didn't put me in many of the dance numbers because they was like, you can just sit at the side and like take a breath because you've done a lot so far. But that was a lot of fun. And then in my first year, for First Year Shakespeare, we did the Taming of the Shrew, and I was the producer, and just the whole atmosphere of that show was just so lovely. Like, it was just a group of us. Yeah, it was just really nice, and kind of my two best friends at the moment I have from that show. And it was just such a nice process, and we just had fun, and there was very little drama.
That's good.
And it holds a very special place in my heart.
Weirdly, the less drama there is in theatre, the better.
Yes.
But yeah, no. So that sounds. I mean, just to quickly go back to the Alice in Wonderland one. That sounds like a fascinating way to interpret that piece. Is there for anyone that might want to check it out? Is there any a writer or director who's associated with that you can remember off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head, because it was one that the theatre company that I was with had found. So obviously the person that was directing it, but it wasn't their script, so I'm not entirely sure.
Right.
But I can drop you a message if I find it, and you can add it to like the.
Good. Okay. Brilliant. Yeah, we can put it in the YouTube description or something like that. So yeah, there you go, listeners, if you want to check that out. Okay. Yeah, so obviously you've probably had you've already talked about your friend from Antigone with the backpack stuff, but are there any other directors or kind of actors who have influenced you or inspired you over the years?
Yeah, I do love Michelle Terry, current artistic director of the Globe, I just think she's amazing. Because she kind of does everything. She's directing, she's acting, she's producing, she's just kind of, and she's always does I think really interesting versions of things.
Right.
And facilitates a lot of really interesting work. So if you think of kind of Amelia, that was put on in 2018, written by Morgan Lloyd Malcolm and directed by Nicole Charles. I mean, it's their project, but I think Michelle Terry did kind of create an environment where that could be created.
Yeah, which is so important as a lead of a theatre.
Yeah, and there's a director called Polly Findlay,
right?
She's done some work with the National. I just really, really love her work. So she did a version of Antigone that I saw with Jodie Whittaker and Christopher Eccleston.
Right.
Really interesting. Yeah. And kind of some of my ideas for my version of Antigone were kind of that I got while I was watching that, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. You know, I'd like to draw more on that in my one kind of thing. So I did find her a very big inspiration when I was watching that. And Katie Mitchell, probably quite generic to say, but just kind of not so much the actual plays she puts on, because she puts on, I like Shakespeare and early modern plays, and she puts on kind of much more modern stuff. But her rehearsal process I find very interesting. Yeah. So I do have a copy of her book that just has like scribbles all over it, because I think I quite like the way she works behind a script and behind a play.
I feel like every copy of any kind of like director or dramaturg's book that I have is just covered in notes. It's just covered in scribbles. But yeah, no. So obviously you directed Antigone on at the university, but is Greek theatre something that kind of speaks to you in a way, or is that?
I do love Greek theatre. I'm not as kind of well versed in it as I would like to be, but I really love tragedies, which obviously Greek theatre is just a plethora of tragedies. It's amazing. And I just think there are just some really interesting characters. Like, I love Greek mythology in general, and kind of the way that works into Greek plays I find really interesting, and like kind of Greek literature and some Medea in particular. I find it so interesting. The dynamic between her and, I'm going to get it wrong, I think it's Jason is the guy in the play, but that could very easily be incorrect. But the kind of their dynamic, I just find fascinating, and her as a character I find really interesting. So I think the Greeks did come up with some very, very interesting characters.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and people are probably fed up with me talking about this because this is the third podcast I've mentioned this, but we've just finished doing a version of Iphigenia in Taurus, and some of the characters in that are just wonderful. I mean, Iphigenia is such a strong, empowering character who just kind of no nonsense, just gets on with it, and I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I love Orestes as a character just because he's so like screwed up,
Yeah.
I almost like how kind of fragile he is, if that makes sense. Without
Yeah, I get that.
yeah, it's endearing, if not incredibly irritating. But for everyone in the play, I mean, not for me. Okay, so Eleanor, we as per a recurring segment on the show, I do have to ask you, what is your favourite Shakespeare play?
My favourite Shakespeare play is The Taming of the Shrew. It has been for a very, very long time. I just think Kate is such an amazing character. She has some brilliant speeches, like especially the one in 5-2, like Fi, and they threatening unkind brow, the famous one. But I also think that Bianca is misunderstood quite a lot in the terms of she's actually very clever in the way that she plays her gender and plays the men around her, and she's very aware of what she's doing. She knows how to get what she wants, so she does, and kind of the difference between how Kate and Bianca go about trying to get what they want and their varying levels of success, I just think is really interesting.
It's almost the point of the play.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah, it's I love Taming the Shrew. I AD'd a version of it a little while ago. And yeah, no, I think I couldn't agree more. I think the play is about, let's face it, all the men in it are the worst. And the play is about the girls. And seeing kind of how they deal with just being surrounded by a bunch of just the worst people, otherwise known as men. I'm kidding up to a point. But yeah, okay. Enough about you. Let's get on to the news of the week. So, I realise the more episodes I record of this, the news of the week is more like the news of the week a few weeks ago. But because obviously this is coming out in December and we're recording this right at the beginning of December. But the National has announced this kind of streaming service for all of their plays, which is, I think, an amazing thing. And I just wanted to get your take on it. What do you think?
I do think it's really, really good, and it's a really good way to keep theatre present and kind of in the now and make sure that people still have access to it. And you can kind of, if you can't afford the full year thing, you can just rent like a one-off play. Like say if you really wanted to see the Othello that they've put up, you can just rent that, which I do think is really good. But there is kind of a difference between watching something online and watching something in person. So I do think sometimes streaming is amazing, and if it's the only way we can access theatre, then we should use it as much as we can. But it does kind of make me a little bit sad sometimes because I watch it and I'm like, oh, but I'm not actually there. And kind of the because you can like pause it and leave and come back, I think you lose the kind of the immersion element of theatre.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I really hope that it doesn't affect the number of people coming to see theatre when they reopen. I really hope it doesn't. I hope it's a change for good, essentially. But also, it's an excellent way, I think, of capturing plays that may never be put on again. I mean, obviously, a play like Othello will be put on again at some point. But certain versions of it, I think it's a very good way of capturing things like that, which would, yeah. And to be fair, especially with a production company, what am I saying? A theatre like the National, where they have a just enormous backlog, there's no point in them not doing this, I think, if that makes sense. Like, it's utilising what they have, especially to keep themselves afloat. But I am wondering what you think this could mean for like the future of theatres. Do you think other theatres are going to copy this? Things like the RSC and others like that?
Yeah, I think you can access some of the RSC stuff online in the kind of, they've got like a learning portal. So you can, for the RSC, you can kind of watch stuff, and drama students have access to drama online. So there is quite a lot of streaming already available. But it does kind of make me think, kind of what you just said about how now that they have streaming, does that mean that people are going to stop actually going to theatres when they reopen, and does that mean that people are just going to be like, oh well, I can watch it from home, so what's the point in going? And I think we might be in danger of losing a very central part of theatre and what the theatre experience is.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I mean, obviously I brought up the same point, so I do agree. But I also think it might be an opportunity to kind of reel in people who would never have previously gone to the theatre, either because they don't have the, as you said earlier, they don't have the money, or they don't have the time to, make a day trip into London or whatever big city is nearby and go and watch some theatre. And it doesn't stop. I don't think it will. I don't think. Basically, what I'm saying is, I don't think all theatres are going to do this by any stretch. So I don't think we're going to see local theatres and stuff like that shutting down at any point soon. But yeah, it is something that I think as a community we need to keep an eye on, because we don't want to become complacent in this kind of time of almost in this lack of theatre, essentially, in this vacuum that we are currently in. Yeah.
I think I always forget, because I live so close to London, I forget that it takes, sometimes people have to make a whole day of it. I do forget that I am in quite a privileged location for theatre.
I think quite a lot of the people at this uni, I mean, when we're at this uni, we're only, 40 minutes away from London at any point.
And so in terms of kind of getting it to places or to people that can't come to London or Manchester or somewhere else that has a big theatre, it is really good in that respect, because it means you don't have to spend a whole day travelling. You can just kind of watch it from your home. So it is really good in that way.
Yeah, I agree. So on that note, I think we will call it here for today. So thank you so much, Eleanor, for coming on. This has been lovely.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
That's okay. And yeah. Thank you for joining me this week for Bard Times. This has been Jack Hardman. Stay safe, and in the words of the Bard himself, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. See you next time.